This video is going to show you some of the basics in the FL Studio UI and also how to set up a microphone and record into your track manager over here. So when you open up FL Studio, it can look pretty overwhelming, but I'm going to go through step by step what each thing is. So the first thing you have up here is your pattern manager. And so this is usually used for things like virtual instruments or placing in samples into a pattern that can then be put over here into your song and repeated throughout the song and such if need be. So I'll go down here, for example, and I'll just grab, I have a couple packs. Here is a kick, right? I have a hi-hat, and I can put in something like a snare. And now when I click this, these are in 16th note intervals, right? So there's 16 here, 4 beats. So when I do this, here is 4 kicks, and then I can do hi-hats on the off beats, and I can do snares here, for example. So now with this, when you go over to the song itself and you have pattern 1 selected, and you will know you have pattern 1, well, I guess in this case pattern 7, I have no idea why I'm on pattern 7, but I have pattern 7 selected, and you will know what you have selected because it will show you here. So I have pattern 7 selected, I click, it is now in the song. And if I wanted pattern 7 over and over and over, you wanted to repeat this throughout the song, you would click over and over, or you can use this paintbrush tool, click where you want it to start, and continue to drag along. So that is how you do your patterns in terms of using this UI. However, you can achieve the same thing. The default note is C5. If you go up, it will be a higher pitch of whatever sample you're using. If you go down, it will be a lower pitch of whatever sample you're using. Or if you are using something like a piano, something that has something like a virtual instrument through, say, Kontakt or Citrus or some other plugin, it will be the same thing. This is what note you will be playing, versus instead this will just take whatever sample you have at whatever pitch it's at, and if you go up, it'll go up by 1 semitone each time, as if it was a virtual instrument. But this is the same thing where, right, 16, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you wanted to take a pattern and do something like this, so instead of repeating the pattern 4 times, instead of repeating the pattern 4 times out here, now this pattern is just 4 measures long. So you would have to repeat a lot less often, versus say you did the exact same thing over here. These patterns are fundamentally equivalent, other than the fact that this one is just longer. So that's how you would do that. And then obviously through this, you can go and do different patterns for different parts, and then compose them however you wish out here in your actual song manager. Alright, so moving forward, obviously at this point, it goes without saying that this is your song manager, so this is where pretty much everything would go for you to actually make your composite song. And so, for example, if I were to take some tracks, these are just some simple tracks from something that I've rendered out from in the past, but obviously each of these tracks will play simultaneously and it will sound like an actual song from this point. But you can also compile this the same way with your patterns. In this case, for sake of demonstration, I just used these tracks that I already had rendered out. And then also over here, you can do things with your snap, so your beat, right? So when you're moving your selector forward, it will go 1 beat at a time. But if you change this snap to half a beat, if you zoom in a little more, you will see that now you go 1/2 of a beat at a time. So you're essentially, this is now eighth notes, right? You can also do a third of a beat if you're trying to achieve a triplet, something of that nature. A fourth of a beat, obviously we are now split into 16th notes, and then so on and so forth. And the none, that's as low as you can get. If you zoom all the way in, scroll back to the beginning, you will see it is a very, very small amount. So when you're doing extremely precise trimming, I would suggest using none. But 99% of the time, I stick with beat or half a beat because it makes snapping things directly to actual beats much easier. All right. So if you wanted to change your BPM is up here. Sorry, since I have those wave formats in here, it's asking me that question. But you can turn your BPM up or down here. This is how you turn on your metronome here. If you want to do typing keyboard to MIDI, which essentially turns your normal QWERTY keyboard into a MIDI controller, you would click this button. Or if you don't and you want to be able to use certain macros, then you would turn that off. I don't use many of these much. Obviously, this is how you would set a loop. And most of those other things would need a more in-depth tutorial because those aren't really beginner things to be doing. All right. So up here, obviously, this is your view playlist. That's where you would actually get rid of your quote-unquote song template. This is your mixer. That's what this is down here. Your channel rack, right? That would be basically your pattern creator. And then obviously you have your plugin picker here, which I personally don't use this very often. This is more for over here. And then project. And then if you don't know what tempo your song is, you can use this. Those 4 clicks, right? Those were in the closest hole those were to was 143 BPM. So I know that now. I know how fast I can determine how fast I want a song, how slow I want a song. And then this is just your touch controller. Up here, there will be times, right? So if you see right now, all I have in this are those wave files that I dragged in. That is because this says audio. However, if you want it to have everything, like those samples that I had before, you would want to go to all. And then if you go to unsorted, it would get rid of your audio. I tend to go with all most of the time unless there's something very specific in the actual audio portion that I dragged in that I am looking for. Down here is your mixer. You have, essentially an infinite number of channels that you can use if you wanted to send something to a certain channel. So say I wanted to send this kick to channel 1. Send the hi-hat to channel 2, send the snare to channel 3, right? So we'll do kick, hi-hat, snare, hi-hat. Whoops. So now that I have this here, right, when I play this, which I don't have FL Studio set up to be able to actually have you guys hear this, but it doesn't matter what you're hearing. Really, you just need the visual cue. So if you see, when the kick is going, it is routed to channel 1. That is going. When the hi-hat's hit, hi-hat is routed to channel 2. You can see that. And then the snare routed to channel 3. That is that. So when you're actually doing your mixing, that is how you would route to certain mixers to where now you can go in here, add, say, a compressor, add, say, an EQ, so on and so forth. And that will now run this through those effects however you set them up. I could do the same thing here, I could do the same thing here, and they're all routed to this master bus. If you put any effects on the master bus, it will affect everything that goes through the entire signal chain. Everything that you hear out of FL Studio is routed through the master bus. So say you were to put a delay on the master bus. Every single thing that is in FL Studio will now have this delay on it. And so this is more often when you hear mix and master, this is more what they're talking about, is you're doing your mastering through this. And so oftentimes, personally, I will not use the master at all in terms of my actual mixing. I will mix, then I will bounce down to a WAV file, and then I will master from there. That is also something that I would consider more than basic knowledge at this point if you're just getting into FL Studio. So, say you wanted to route your microphone to where it comes through FL Studio, records into FL Studio, and then you have some sort of audio file that you can then manipulate or mix or whatever. And this would go the same way if you were to have an instrument input such as a bass, a guitar, so on and so forth. But for sake of this demonstration, right, I will route my microphone. I have an audio interface that has 8 inputs. Obviously, you can see all 8 of those here. And then you also have the stereo versions here, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I have an amp modeler, and in that amp modeler, I have things like a stereo delay. And obviously in the back of it, it has 2 outputs if I were to want to use those. So say I had those plugged into 7 and 8, I would then be getting a stereo sound out of 7 and 8. But since I'm only using the one microphone, and the microphone is a mono channel, I only need to do whatever the microphone is plugged into. And in my case, that would be 5. So you can now see when I'm speaking, it is coming through right here. All right. And so what you would want to do, right, you see this is where the magic happens. This is your arm button. If I click this, you no longer see it because that channel is no longer armed. It is no longer armed to record. And that is important because, as you see, it still has this selected, right? But there is nothing coming through because it's not armed to record. However, as soon as you click it to arm to record, it is now ready to record. You click this button up here, right? And then you would click play on this. It says record in 3, 2, 1. And now, as you can see, it's recording my voice straight into this. I will now stop by hitting pause. I can turn my record button off. And if I so desire, I can also unarm the track. This is now its own independent entity right down here. And so if I wanted to route this to say insert 6, and then I wanted to put an EQ on it, I now have what I just recorded, and I can process it as I see fit. That would be the same exact thing if I were to record a guitar, right? You would record your guitar to a metronome or however you see fit. And then from that point, you would stop, and then you can route your guitar to wherever you want it to go down here, and then mix it accordingly. The final thing that I will say in this that I neglected to mention before is this is your switcher between pattern and song. So if you wanted to listen to only what you had in this pattern, say I had this programmed out in this pattern, if I wanted to listen to this pattern on a loop, I would have it set to pattern mode and click play. As you see, you cannot hear obviously, but as you can see, it is 1, 2, 3, 4, and it is looping over and over. Or if I click the song, since this is what's in the song playlist, if I clicked play, it would play back what I recorded a minute ago instead of this. But say I were to put this pattern out here, now I have both playing out here. So that is the difference between the pattern and song selector.